Hi, this is Mark Taylor-Canfield, and this is the MTC Report.
By the way, folks, while we're at it, great. Go.
Don't go anywhere. The MTC Report with Mark Taylor-Canfield continues next.
Another election, another convention, another media intervention.
I hope that as we move in the last weeks of this campaign, more and more people will understand what's at stake in this election. It really does come down to what kind of country we are going to have.
So sad when she talks about violence at my rallies, and she caused the violence.
This is the MTC Report. And I'm a nationally recognized journalist and musician. I report every Tuesday for the Jeff Santos Show, broadcast across the country on the Revolution Radio Network. And I also am a contributing editor for Democracy Watch News. I also have a blog at Daily Coast. I write at Truth Out and many other places, so check it out if you get a chance. At this point, I'm reporting on the latest election news. Here's the latest news about the U.S. presidential elections. According to the New York Times, Hillary Clinton and Mr. Trump used the final Saturday before Election Day to make their closing pitches to voters, with Mrs. Clinton in South Florida and Philadelphia and Mr. Trump dashing to 4 states across 3 time zones. A man was apprehended at a Donald Trump rally in Reno, Nevada on Saturday night after someone shouted about a gun, but no weapon was found.
You will finally have a government on your side, fighting for your community and protecting your family. By the way, folks, while we're at it, great. Go.
So the latest on what happened in Reno tonight at the Donald Trump rally is, according once again to the New York Times, Donald Trump, in a, quote, startling scene, was rushed off stage by members of his Secret Service detail during a rally on Saturday night. So apparently a person in the crowd shouted that someone had a gun. A man thought to have the gun was apprehended, but no weapon was found, the Secret Service said, and the man was released. Reporters from both The Guardian and KRNV, a Reno television station who interviewed the man, reported on Twitter that he had been holding signs saying Republicans against Trump. Yes, folks, it's coming up very quickly, and it's becoming a very close race. Except, according to the New York Times, there's no such thing as Election Day any longer because more than 33 million Americans have already voted by Friday. And there are signs from the early results, including high turnout among Hispanic voters in key states, that could cause some concern for the Trump campaign. So here's a look at what's happening in the campaign during the final weekend. Early voting could spell trouble for Trump as Hispanic voters turn out in droves. Republicans have been worried that Mr. Trump's hard line on immigration will turn off Hispanic voters, and early signs suggested that their fears are justified. In Florida, at least 200,000 more Hispanics had voted early as of Friday than did during the entire early voting period 4 years ago. And this is according to an analysis by Steve Schale, a Democratic strategist who helped run President Obama's campaign. Nevada, another critical battleground, is proving to be a similar story. According to John Ralston, a political analyst for KTNV, high turnout from Latinos and Democrats in the state's crucial Clark County is a bad sign for Republicans. Democrats outpaced Republicans in Clark County by 11,000 votes cast on Friday, Mr. Ralston reported, thus giving Mrs. Clinton a larger firewall than Mr. Obama had in the state when he won by 7 points in 2012. So Clinton, returning to Florida, is trying to galvanize the Latino voters there. Her afternoon rally in Pembroke Pines, Florida, which is an increasingly diverse community in Broward County, was aimed at inspiring the region's mix of Hispanic, Black, Caribbean, and Jewish voters to cast early ballots. But a driving rain diverted Mrs. Clinton from her script and revealed a happy warrior rarely seen on the campaign trail. This is according to the New York Times. Here's what I want you to remember, she told the crowd. I want to be the president for everybody. Everybody who agrees with me, people who don't agree with me, people who will vote for me, and people who don't vote for me. The New York Times' Michael Barbaro described the scene as a moment with unfamiliar sense of abandon and joy, with Mrs. Clinton smiling widely and waving her arms in the rain. Well, at a rally in Tampa, Trump called Clinton a, quote, constitutional crisis in the making, and he kissed a baby. For most of Mr. Trump's rally in Tampa, Florida, he struck his favorite lines of attack, warning that Mrs. Clinton would pillage the pocketbooks of regular Americans and work to enrich her cronies. So, let's be honest, this has been one of the lowest brow elections in the history of the United States. In the presidential race, we've seen accusations of sexual assault, racism, bigotry, misogyny, and corruption. Negative ads and personal attacks have become the norm, and many observers with a discerning eye have witnessed the decline of social discourse to the point where the entire election has become just another bad reality TV show. To those who possess a sense of humor and irony, the debates were so similar to satirical Saturday Night Live skits that honestly, it's very difficult to tell the difference. It's a surreal world we're living in, folks. With the media bought up by major corporate entities telling you what to think and who to vote for. The entire strategy of both the Democratic and Republican campaigns has been reduced to a he said, she said type of scenario. And this year, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton have spent most of their time throwing muck around and ducking the mud. So muckrakers and mudslingers across the country are having an absolute field day with this. And many commentators have acted completely irresponsible by hoisting up false flags, and some continually predict the, quote, imminent indictments and resignations that are to come. There seems to be no end to the biased speculations and inaccurate reporting coming from so-called previously reliable sources. So understandably, given this embarrassing situation, many registered voters have decided that this election is unfortunately not worth bothering with. I mean, the political dialogue from both campaigns has been reduced to one oversimplified theme, which is, quote, the dictator versus the criminal. Some might call that a meme. Yet, if responsible members of the public don't acknowledge their duty as citizens to vote and participate in the system, then the choice is going to be made by rabid white supremacists and corporate party hacks. Although I agree that as a nation we've sunk to a historical low in terms of dirty politics, it still remains our job to help select the candidate who will become the so-called leader of the free world.
On one side it votes for Bernie, the leaders they want Hillary. He's doing phone banks, he's taking polls, and every day That's what you get, folks. We're voting for Bernie. That BernieSanders guy. It's one big mess. The party's splitting. And can't you guess? He feels neglected. And she's suspected of sleeping with Wall Street.
Where he incites violence, where he applauds people who are pushing and pulling and punching at his rallies. That is not who America is.
Meanwhile, more honest and authentic candidates like Bernie Sanders and the Green Party's Dr. Jill Stein have been relegated to the sidelines as usual, leaving many of us wondering if we'll ever see the likes of John Kennedy or Jimmy Carter again. In my estimation, what we really need is a truly independent working class candidate who's above all of the corruption caused by the influences of big money coming from those same entrenched centers of power that control the media. And until that happens, we're going to be stuck with these mediocre candidates forced on us by the two main parties in this winner-take-all system of government, system of elections. Alternative parties are mostly ignored by the big media.
People said I had no health insurance, or I had a high
This
deductible.
is the MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield.
We can have a world-class healthcare system without waiting lines.
Donald is pushed on something which is obviously uncomfortable, like what these women are saying, he immediately goes to denying responsibility. And it's not just about women.
This has been an extremely tumultuous and controversial election season. But whatever happens between now and November 8th, at least we'll have a new progressive member of Congress representing Seattle, Washington. Pramila Jayapal is the real thing. She was one of the first politicians in the country to come out in support of Bernie Sanders, long before most Democratic Party folks had come out to support him. And her campaign rally at the Showbox Theater last month, a famous rock club in Seattle, she had Bernie Sanders there, and it was raucous and energetic, just like a rock concert.
4 million votes, which told the entire establishment that...
And the fact that many in the audience actually booed the mention of Hillary Clinton's name is just one indication of how independent-minded Jayapal's supporters have become. She may be a Democrat, but she might best be described as a Bernie-crat, who will prove to be even more outspoken and controversial than our retiring 14-term Congress member, Jim McDermott. But it's good to know that while politics on the national scene is degrading rapidly, at least in the Northwest, politics continues to push the envelope, and voters continue to demand more authenticity from our local political representatives. As the two major parties continue to split up and embrace below-the-belt punches style of politics, there will be at least one politician in Washington, D.C. who will stand apart from all of that nonsense. And I predict that Pramila Jayapal from Washington State will fight courageously to represent the average working person. But there was a time when the Democrats actually stood for a progressive agenda. And, of course, you can harken back to Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR. But in the 1980s and 90s, and now in the 21st century, the early part of the 21st century, the Democrats have become a corporate party. So the democratic system is under threat even within the Democratic Party itself, where earlier this year, WikiLeaks, helped cause the resignation of Debbie Wasserman Schultz, the chairperson of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee. So part of the scenario that I've been working on is what happens to the political spectrum in the United States when the Republican Party dies on the vine, just withers and dies because of its own extremism, and then the Democrats move farther and farther to the right, becoming the new Republican Party, the new Demopublicans, as I call them, or Republicrats. It's another phrase I like to use. There have been further revelations since then, and there have been more resignations. Meanwhile, the FBI is investigating Hillary Clinton's email server, her private email server, was she was Secretary of State. Donald Trump's college got shut down due to fraudulent practices. His foundation in New York City received a cease and desist letter from the Attorney General of New York State, claiming that his foundation was operating without proper certification. So there's all sorts of accusations of corruption and a lot of disappointment in people who are observing this election. And it doesn't look great for us to the rest of the world, definitely, to have such a lowbrow attitude about our own political system. And, so my prediction is that there will be a coalition of very progressive groups who will get together to fill that void where the Democrats have left this big opening in the U.S. political system. So someone needs to counter the Democrats, and if it's not going to be the Republicans, then it'll have to be this new progressive party. And maybe they can hold the Democrats a little more accountable to furthering this so-called progressive agenda that they have. But if they are not going to be ready to embrace opposition movements against fracking and the TPP, then they're missing out on a lot of the populist vote in the country, especially in the Midwest, where factory jobs have disappeared. And also, they're missing out on progressive votes and left-of-center votes. Of course, as I've said many times, what's considered left-of-center in the United States is probably considered middle of the road in most of Europe. But that's the way the political center has switched over to the right. And with the media machinations that have been going on and the collusion between the candidates and their staff and the media, you can't really trust what the major networks are telling you. And I wouldn't trust the polls either, because historically they've been shown to be incorrect. Although at this point, most of the news media is reporting that it's almost a tie, that Donald Trump has gained a lot of support in the last few weeks, and that it's coming down to the wire, as they say, so to speak. But can you trust that? Do we really know? There's also this issue of early voting, where in Washington State, a lot of folks have already voted. They've mailed in their ballots, and so they've kind of like kicked back, and they aren't actively campaigning for their candidate anymore. So that may have an effect on the election. The demographics in the country have changed quite a bit since the last election, so that could make a big difference. All I can say is that it's been unpredictable, and it will probably continue to be unpredictable for the next few days. And of course, a lot of people are waiting for that, quote, October surprise. But all I can tell you is tune in, folks, and keep listening to my reports, because we'll give you the scoop and the background on the stories that you see every day. This is Mark Taylor-Canfield for the MTC Report.
Don't go anywhere. The MTC Report with Mark Taylor-Canfield continues next.
Welcome to the MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield. We offer you independent voices and underreported stories about topics you won't hear anywhere else. Join us as we delve into the deeper issues behind the news stories of the day on the MTC Report.
Back, Tom Harmon here with you. Okay, here's what we know. Adam Goldman reporting over at the New York Times about James Comey and the FBI. It's very straightforward. Comey says that he's taking steps to, quote, the emails have surfaced in an unrelated case, so we don't know what that is, that, quote, appear to be pertinent to the investigation, end quote. We're not sure what investigation that is. And he said that the FBI is taking steps, quote, to determine whether they contain classified information as well as to assess their importance to our investigation, end of quote. We don't know what that means. He said he doesn't know how long it's going to take. He said he doesn't know if the new information is significant.
And I've been exiled mainly to Britain for BBC and The Guardian.
It's remarkable because I remember in 2000 when Jeb Bush ordered 40,000 African Americans knocked off the voting rolls so that his brother could get within 500 votes of stealing the election. You reported that for BBC. Everybody in Europe knew what was going on. Everybody all around the world knew what was going on. There was a complete blackout on it here in the United States.
Yeah. There's massive rationing in America. It is rationing based on money. If you don't have money,
it's a lot of hype, and Hillary's nervous. She answers twice. It's really thrilling that they're so willing to vote for Bernie. Yeah, the Bernie Sanders guy.
Where he incites violence, where he applauds people who are pushing and pulling and punching at his rallies. That is not who America is.
So the question is, what do you do if you're a voter out there and you can't in your own conscience vote for Hillary Clinton or for Donald Trump? It's a dilemma that a lot of people are facing. Now, as I said before, some folks have decided to vote for Jill Stein and the Green Party, hoping that they can build a progressive movement for the future. Other folks decided that they wanted to vote for Gary Johnson, partly as a protest vote. The truth is that when you're in a swing state, you could make the difference by not voting for one of the two major parties. You could actually help throw the election to the other side. In states where it's very clear who is going to be the candidate that will win those electoral votes, and by the way, that's a whole other discussion, the undemocratic electoral college system in the United States, which just is archaic and outmoded. And I've been saying, I'm quoted by the Associated Press saying at least 6 years ago that it needs to be, it just needs to be dismantled and eliminated. I mean, the electoral college is ridiculous. It reminds me a lot of the superdelegate issue in the Democratic Party where they were stacked for Hillary and against Bernie Sanders. Do you want a few select people? And if you want to look into the history of the Electoral College, it's based on what used to happen in Europe. They had electors. The electors of Hanover were a very powerful and famous group of people. They were nobles and lords, aristocrats who were given the choice of choosing who the king should be. So there you go, the Electoral College. Now we have that represented in the United States, and it's been a part of our system for several centuries now. But back to the question at hand, what do you do if you're a person who doesn't want to vote for Donald Trump? Maybe you're a Republican and you just cannot bring yourself to vote for your party's nominee. I would highly recommend that you quit the party at this point, given their nominee. But you know, some people would say the same thing about Democrats. So here's the thing: if you're in a state where Donald Trump is obviously going to take it, or you're in a state where Hillary Clinton is obviously going to get your electoral votes, then voting for an alternative or third-party candidate may not have any effect on the election whatsoever, but it may help you feel better, and it may help build some momentum for a coalition in the future. And I would say that we are witnessing a very big change and shift in American politics this year. There's a lot of mistrust and a lot of sense of corruption and big money controlling the elections in a way that I've never seen before, even after the Citizen United decision by the Supreme Court, equating money with freedom of speech. It's even worse this year. And we've seen a lot of dissatisfaction in the way that the media, the press has been covering the elections. So there's a huge audience out there now for an alternative movement, either politically and or alternative media. So a lot of corporate folks are pulling their funding, even some labor unions and other traditionally Democratic Party groups, affiliated groups, are pulling their funding and sponsorship from some progressive media around the country. We've seen that before around other elections when Air America was taken off the air after the Obama election. Cumulus bought up 330 radio stations at that time. Clear Channel bought up 880. So these are corporate political coups, basically, where they just buy up the media. Now you have AT&T wanting to buy up Time Warner. So you concentrate the power in a few hands, and what are you going to get? It's not a balanced view, and it's not a balanced election. So back again to the question, what do you do if you don't want to vote for either candidate of the two major parties, the Democrats and the Republicans? If you're in a state where it looks like Hillary Clinton is going to win your state, and then you're a traditionally Democratic state. I know Washington State has not voted in a majority during a presidential election for a Republican since Ronald Reagan. So I doubt that's going to happen here. Of course, this has been a very unpredictable election, and so there is no guarantees in any of this. There's also been a lot of talk of the possibility of vote purging. I know Greg Palast has talked a lot about that in his film, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, is currently touring the country. He's also got a book called that. There's been a lot of talk about rigging the election. Even Donald Trump has talked about that. And there are vulnerabilities in the system, in the electronic voting system. In some states like Washington and Oregon, people mail in their ballots, so there's a little bit less of an issue with that. But beware that there are ways of stacking the decks, so to speak. And when you have secretaries of state or election officials who are affiliated with one party or the other, there is a tendency for that to happen. We've seen that before in Florida and Ohio. Republican secretaries of state pulling these kinds of things. So do not be surprised if there are some last-minute shenanigans during this election. In the meantime, I leave it up to you. Your vote is your sacred honor. It's your personal, conscience-driven act that is sacred in, as far as I'm concerned. So I leave it up to you. I'm not going to tell anybody who to vote for. I just wanted to lay out the facts as I see them as a journalist. This is Mark Taylor-Canfield, and this is the MTC Report.
He went after a federal judge born in Indiana, but who Donald said couldn't be trusted to try the fraud and racketeering case against Trump University because his parents were Mexican. So it's not one thing. This is a pattern of divisiveness, of a very dark and in many ways dangerous vision of our country.
People said I had no health insurance or I had a high
This is the MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield.
We can have a world-class healthcare system without waiting lines.
Donald is pushed on something which is obviously uncomfortable, like what these women are saying. He immediately goes to denying responsibility. And it's not just about women. He never apologizes or says he's sorry for anything.